Thank you for joining us today. My name is Katrina Snyder, and I've had the pleasure of working with the Alzheimer's Association in connection with the Fountains at Riverview Senior Living Community, including our participation in the annual Hudson Valley Walk to End Alzheimer's. Also, as a board member of the Friends of TRA, formerly known as Boxwood Alliance, we continue our mission to support TRA in our collaborative efforts to promote independence for older adults and adults with disability through education, social, and cultural programming such as today's event. During the presentation, we invite you to add any questions you may have in the chat, and at the end, there will be an opportunity for a question and answer session. For those needing some assistance with the chat functionality, it is located towards the bottom of your screen. And once you click on chat, it opens up the box on the right in order for you to type in your message there. Now allow me to introduce Rachele Nicoletti, community educator for the Alzheimer's Association and volunteer placement specialist at Volunteer New York, and David Zucker, the community engagement manager with the Hudson Valley chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, both of whom bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to the field of understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. Take it away, folks.
Thank you, Katrina. I am Rachele Nicoletti, as Katrina said, and I am a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. I have been in the community educator role for 2 years, and I became involved with the Alzheimer's Association about 2 years into my mom's diagnosis of dementia. She was diagnosed in 2017. And in the beginning, I didn't really know that dementia and Alzheimer's were the same or part of the same thing. I thought dementia was dementia, Alzheimer's was Alzheimer's, and I didn't realize that all of the resources available at Alzheimer's Association could be helpful for me. My mom and dad were immigrants from Italy. They grew up in a small town, and they came to the United States for the American dream. And so growing up, it was so important for them to have the help of others. So I've kind of been a volunteer all my life. I started volunteering when I was 15 in high school, working in Harlem, helping young people learn how to speak the language and get through the rigors of school. And so when I found out how valuable it was to have this wonderful resource with the Alzheimer's Association, it was great to be able to have a care consultation. My dad and I got on a Zoom call, and we learned some really practical ways to help us deal with my mom's dementia. So I made a pact with myself that I would become an advocate and let everyone know the wonderful work that's being done by the Alzheimer's Association. And so I do that through these community education seminars. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. This is a very basic course telling us about the facts concerning Alzheimer's and dementia. We'll talk about what the differences are. We'll hear from some of the experts in the field. We'll also hear from some people that have Alzheimer's and how they're dealing with it and what the challenges are. As Katrina said, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as we're going through. If you think of a question, just type it into the chat. And at the end of the presentation, David and I will address all your questions, and you'll even have an opportunity to send emails asking for more information if that's what you'd like to do. So let's get started. The learning objectives for today: we want to be able to compare Alzheimer's and dementia and understand what the differences are. We want to be able to recognize how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain. We want to be able to list the risk factors of Alzheimer's disease, identify the stages of the disease, describe how scientists are working to advance research, and name the resources available through the Alzheimer's Association. So that's in a nutshell what we hope to cover within this next hour and 15 minutes. So first we want to talk about the facts, the impact of Alzheimer's. And these facts can be a little bit shocking to people who haven't been involved in anyone who's had a disease like this. It can be pretty shocking. So we'll go through them one at a time. It is a crisis. Over 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's or other dementias right now, 55 million around the world, and 6 million here in the United States. More than 11 million people provide unpaid care for these loved ones. And I think that when you start to think about that, this is people who are working, people who are trying to get on with their lives and at the same time take care of someone who they care about. There is a tremendous cost associated with this. I think that it's estimated that these caregivers provide 16 billion hours of care. This was just last year, and that's valued at near $272 billion. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, because the disease not only affects, of course, the person who is going through it, but the people that love them and the people that care about them. So 1 in 3 seniors die with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, and as you'll learn later on, is on a continuum. There's a path that people go through when they're first diagnosed, but 1 in 3 seniors that die with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's kills more people than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. It's costing the nation in 2023, it was over $345 billion. And by 2050, the cost is estimated to be over $1 trillion. So you can see the crisis is really expanding. The lifetime risk of Alzheimer's at age 45 is 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 10 for men. You'll learn a little bit later on in this program that women are more likely to get Alzheimer's than men, and I'll give you some statistics about that. And this one I think is so very interesting. Only 4 in 10 people will talk to their doctor about cognitive concerns, but 1 in 10 want to know about cognitive issues if it could allow for early treatment. So I think this is really a key to part of the reason why I want to make sure that the word gets out. People right now are afraid to talk about it. They want to hide it if they have symptoms sometimes because they don't want to accept the fact that something might be happening. But the true matter is that if they get evaluated, if they have cognitive testing, they have a better chance of getting some help. And David will talk to you about the new treatments that are available now more than ever. So I want to make sure people realize there's no need to be afraid. It's better to be able to go to a doctor, talk about what's going on, find out what it is. It doesn't have to be Alzheimer's. It could be a variety of other things. And you'll hear some more about that too in a few minutes. So let's go on with Alzheimer's and dementia. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And we'll hear from one of our experts. Oh, first we're going to test your knowledge. Sorry. So testing your knowledge. Alzheimer's is a normal part of the aging process, true or false? Now, many people will say, of course, it's false. Alzheimer's is not a normal part of the aging process. But I think the other part about this is, do we think that cognitive loss, do we think that memory loss, extensive memory loss is a normal part of the aging process? And many people think that that's true. But the answer to this question is false. Alzheimer's is a brain disease that causes problems with memory thinking. And memory thinking, and what's that last word that I can't see?
Behavior.
Oh, thank you, behaviors. Thank you, David. All the little boxes are covering the last word. Oh, what is that word? Thinking and behaviors. It is not a normal part of aging. The second one of these test your knowledge questions. People younger than age 65 can get Alzheimer's. What do you think the answer to that question is? I think that many of you have heard about early onset, and the answer to that question is true. Although it is much less common, people younger than 65 can also develop Alzheimer's. In fact, people as young as 40s, in their 40s, have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So let's get back to hearing from the expert and learning more about how Alzheimer's and dementia relate to each other.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So as you've heard from Dr. Snyder, Alzheimer's is the main cause of dementia. So dementia is the umbrella term, and all of these other types of dementia fall under it. Some of these dementias may be familiar to you. Lewy body, for example, is the dementia that Robin Williams had. Ted Turner and Dick Clark all had Lewy body. And frontal lobal, just recently, I guess a couple of years ago, maybe last year, Bruce Willis and Wendy Williams. So these are things that affect everyone in our world. It's kind of like if you have a brain, you have a chance of getting Alzheimer's, and we'll talk more about the risk factors. So why is an accurate diagnosis important? Because there are differences between Lewy body and how it impacts the brain, and how Alzheimer's impacts the brain, and how vascular dementia impacts the brain. We're going to hear now from a relative of someone who had been diagnosed with dementia.
Certainly, having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
So understanding changes, people experiencing memory loss are often aware that something's not right, but they don't know what's going on. So knowing the diagnosis can help them understand the symptoms and also open up a world of opportunities for perhaps clinical trials or other ways that they can get support. So here's a recap of what we've talked about so far. Dementia is a general term for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. It's not a normal part of aging. It is a progressive brain disease. So the brain, Alzheimer's in the brain. So everyone with a brain, as I said, is at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and that includes all of us. There are a few known factors that increase a person's risk in developing Alzheimer's disease. Let's see if you know the most common one. Well, first we're going to hear from the expert. These experts keep popping up in the different times for me. Hold on one second. We're going to hear from Dr.
More than
Carrillo.
100 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior.
The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
Okay, so as Dr. Carrillo said, and as I mentioned to you before, there is a continuum associated with Alzheimer's disease. You know, for my mom early on, one of the things that we noticed was that she began repeating things that she had already told us. And so in the beginning, we would say, well, Mom, you already told us that. The fact of the matter is, as people start to develop these symptoms, it's not logical. They're not able to be logical with you. And so in the moment that they're speaking to you, that is their moment, and that's what they're communicating with you. Later on, when my mom was really no longer able to communicate, I kind of wish that I had those times where she was repeating, because at least we were communicating. So as things get further along, you will find for a lot of people that have different symptoms, but many of them will end up, as Dr. Carrillo said, with difficulty swallowing at the very end stages. So plaques and tangles, as Dr. Carrillo mentioned, they are clusters of protein fat fragments that are built up between nerve cells. They're made of twisted strands of protein. And although scientists are not absolutely sure what causes the cell death that Dr. Carrillo mentioned, plaques and tangles are the prime suspects. And some of the medications you'll hear about later on are designed to attack those plaques and tangles. So the recap, Alzheimer's in the brain. More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alois Alzheimer described specific changes in the brain, the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's causes nerve cells to die, which leads to shrinkage in the brain. The brain changes results in changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. I think the good thing to keep in mind is that our brains continue to generate new cells every day. And this is part of what we talk about in one of our other programs, Healthy Living for the Mind and Body. And we talk about how there's hope. The brain does build new cells. We are able to expand the knowledge that we have. And the more we learn new things and keep our brain going, the more helpful it is in minimizing some of the risks associated with it. So going on now to the risk factors. Now this is where I ask you, let's see if you know what the most common risk factor is. Test your knowledge, okay. What is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's? What do you think? Is it genetics? Is it family history? Is it age? All three of these play a role. Certainly genetics, if there's been someone in your family that has had Alzheimer's or dementia, your chances of getting Alzheimer's are higher. If there's more than one, the risk goes up. Family history is certainly one of the factors, and age is certainly one of the factors. But which of these do you think is the greatest factor? So if you were thinking age, you were right. Although Alzheimer's is not part of normal aging, age is the greatest risk factor for the disease. After age 65, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. So that by the time people are in their 80s, 1 out of every 3 people have Alzheimer's. So the risk increases as we age. Let's hear again from the expert, and this will be Dr. Snyder.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown. but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are two categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So we're going to go on to talk about populations that are at higher risk. So Black Americans are about twice as likely as white Americans to have Alzheimer's or another dementia. Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely to have the disease as white Americans. And as I said earlier, almost 2/3 of our population in America with Alzheimer's are women. So women are more likely to get Alzheimer's. Why this is happening, there's a lot of scientific research going into that. They're not well understood, but researchers believe that higher rates of vascular disease in these groups may also put them at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's. So it is associated with other diseases, things that are going on with their heart or diabetes, things along those lines. So the risk factors recap. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. An individual's risk for developing the disease increases at age 65. Family history is also a known risk factor. Having a parent or a sibling with the disease increases an individual's risk. Risk genes and deterministic genes are the two types of genes associated with Alzheimer's, and these are things that you can get tested for. Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women are at an increased risk for Alzheimer's. Stages of Alzheimer's disease. We talked about the fact that there is a continuum, but we'd like to have you hear from some of the people that are living with Alzheimer's or in one case with Lewy body. So let's start with Teresa. She is living with Alzheimer's.
I'm like an overachiever. And when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password, and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
And now we're going to hear from Phil. He's living with Alzheimer's, and you'll hear that he was a reporter and his frustration with what's going on with him and his diagnosis.
Math, I can't do a simple tip anymore. You know, I sit there, I stare at it. It's crazy what numbers I can't deal with anymore. And in some ways that's the disease to me. The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words, which I've dealt with words my entire life, you know, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
You can hear the frustration in his voice and his inability to be able to figure out a tip, things that we take for granted. The frustration involved in how the disease gets into what you're able to accomplish on a daily basis. Of course, there are no two individuals that experience it the same way, so I think it's so helpful to hear from people that are going through it and to understand it from their perspective. And here's Tom, who is living with dementia with Lewy bodies.
I think the thing that surprises me the most about my dementia is that it is progressive, and I'm finding that I'm forgetting more. And they do memory tests for me all the time at the doctor, and so that becomes a little disconcerting at times, to see my cognitive impairment continue to decline. But again, I really have hope. I don't live really in the future. I can't live in the future. I can't worry about what the future is going to bring. I have to live for today.
I love that about Tom. I think that his message about not worrying about the future, living for today, and finding the hope in every moment is really very uplifting. It's very hard to find an optimistic approach when you're dealing with this on a day in and day out basis. So I always love hearing him talk about this. So the disease, as I said, is a continuum. Very early on, it may be asymptomatic as far as 10 years before it's diagnosed. There'll be no cognitive symptoms, but possible biological changes are going on in the brain. There might be some evidence of these plaques and tangles that are beginning to form. The next stage is MCI, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease. And that's the early stage of cognitive ability loss. But it could end there. Not everybody that has a mild cognitive impairment goes on to have full-blown Alzheimer's. There may be other reasons why people are cognitively impaired. As I said earlier, some of those reasons, thyroid problems, change in medication, high blood pressure, a blood clot. There's so many different things that can be causing cognitive impairment. The fact that it could be due to Alzheimer's disease is one option and one reason why it's so important to find out what's going on, as we said earlier. Once we know that the dementia is due to Alzheimer's disease, there's then 3 more phases. The mild phases, as I said, some of those symptoms might be, interfering with some daily activities, but in a mild kind of way, not remembering, where you put your shoes only to find they're in the refrigerator. Some crazy little things like that might start happening. But they're relatively mild compared to, some of the larger, impacts that you'll see as the disease progresses. And typically in terms of time, my mom was diagnosed in 2017 and she passed away this last December. So she lived 6 years with the disease, and that's pretty average. 6 to 9 years is pretty average. But people can live as much as 20 years with the diagnosis, or as few as 1 or 2 years. Everyone is different. So this continuum will happen in terms of time at different intervals, at different levels for each person. In the moderate phase, there are more pronounced symptoms that interfere with many daily activities. For my mom, she was afraid to get into the shower. She couldn't, she needed help getting up and out of bed. A lot of those things, you definitely begin to need caretaking at that point, a care partner that can be with you as the disease progresses and the symptoms become more pronounced. And then in the severe stage, the symptoms definitely interfere with most activities. My mom did have problems with swallowing. It was difficult for her to eat. It was difficult for her to speak. So I think that, those are some examples of what happens as things get more severe. But things are different for different people. Some people become aggressive. Some people become, their personalities change. Those are all parts of things that might happen and that we don't really know for each individual where the road will take them. What happened here? Okay. So here is the recap. The three broad phases of the disease are asymptomatic, mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. The dementia phase is further broken down into 3 stages: mild, moderate, and severe. No two individuals experience the symptoms and the progression of Alzheimer's disease in the same way. While symptoms worsen over time, people progress through them at different rates as their abilities change. Now, David is going to take us through some of the FDA-approved treatments. David?
Thank you, Rachel. So this is actually my favorite section of this presentation because for the greater part of 100 years, it wouldn't be necessary because there weren't any therapies or treatments. So it's a very exciting time for Alzheimer's research for a number of reasons that I can get into even more in the questions if people are interested. But here we see Dr. Alzheimer in 1906 when he first described his patient with what would become known as Alzheimer's disease. And believe it or not, it wasn't until 1996 when we had the first in a class of drugs that treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's. These are called acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, and they work to increase a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine in the brain that becomes diminished when someone has Alzheimer's. So you may have heard of these drugs: Aricept, Exelon, Razodine, Namenda, Nemzaric. All of these drugs don't address the underlying biology. They rather deal with symptoms. The side effects are not so significant: nausea, upset stomach. They work for some people, they don't work for other people. So plenty of doctors will say it's worth trying. Some people do get a good response and some people don't. So this is really all we had, this class of drugs that deals with the symptoms. And then we had a breakthrough, a somewhat controversial breakthrough, but a breakthrough nonetheless, in 2021 with a drug called aducanumab. The brand name was Aduhelm. And so this is the first in a class of drugs that doesn't actually deal with the symptoms. It deals with the underlying biology of the disease. And from the beginning, it was controversial because some people doubted its efficacy. And it was expensive. And originally, CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, decided not to cover the drug. But they didn't just decide not to cover the drug, they decided not to cover the entire class of drugs, which the Alzheimer's Association really took issue with, because here we are for the first time in upwards of 100 years, we finally have a class of drugs that actually, they're not cures. I want to make that very clear. These are not cures, but we finally have a class of drugs that deal with the underlying biology, and CMS wasn't going to cover it, and it was expensive. So we also, it's very important to us. We talk about health equity. What does that mean? That means that people should have the ability to afford these cutting edge treatments. So the Alzheimer's Association, we held demonstrations in front of CMS's office in New York and in Washington. And in the end, they changed their mind. And so now they decided to cover Aduhelm, but not just that, more importantly, they decided to cover this entire class of drugs. So Aduhelm, like I said, somewhat controversial, has been discontinued. The makers, Biogen, said it wasn't because of safety or efficacy. They wanted to direct their energies into new drugs. They are partners with SI, another company, a Japanese company that developed a drug called Leqembi, which has better, did better in clinical trials than Aduhelm and is not controversial or as controversial as Aduhelm. So the new drug, Leqembi, in June 7th, 2021, we had Aduhelm, aducanumab, and then on July 6th, 2023, the FDA gave traditional FDA approval to Leqembi. So Leqembi, what it does is it dissolves the beta amyloid plaque in the brain of people with Alzheimer's. That's the hallmark of Alzheimer's. The hypothesis that most people prescribe to is that the cascade hypothesis is that when there is death of neurons, the neuronal death that's associated with Alzheimer's, it's because of this beta amyloid plaque and the tau tangles. So the Leqembi, what it does is it actually dissolves the plaque in the brain. So the top line data, 27% decline in progression over 18 months, or delay of progression in 5 months. So it's not a cure, it just buys people extra time. I like to say that if you're going down the highway with Alzheimer's and you're going 70 miles an hour, if you were to take Leqembi, it would kind of be the equivalent of slowing down to 50 miles an hour. So you're still going relatively fast, but it buys you time. And this is the beginning. And then we're very lucky because we recently had a new drug that has even better top-line data called donanemab. The brand name is called Kisunla, and the data shows 35% slower decline in memory, thinking, and ability to perform daily activities as compared to the placebo group. Slows progression 4.5 to 7.5 months over an 18-month period. 39% lower risk of progression over 18 months. So, like I said, these aren't cures, but these are the first class of drugs that actually deal with the underlying biology. There are potential side effects, and I should mention that these drugs are given through infusion. It's not a pill; it's infusion. Leqembi is given twice a month. Takes about an hour to get the infusion, and the price is $26,500 a year, but luckily Medicare, Medicaid, and some private insurances actually cover it. And donanemab, I believe, is $35,000 a year. It's also covered, and with donanemab, you also have the potential for side effects. The most common side effect is called ARIA, or amyloid imaging abnormality. What these really are kind of micro hemorrhages where you have brain bleed or swelling. Most of the time, they were not symptomatic when people had these side effects, but you have to be followed carefully by your primary care physician. Because while most of the time they weren't serious, they potentially could be. So they really need to keep a check on you. And also, before you're even able to take any of these drugs, it's important that they do a PET scan or a spinal tap to analyze your cerebral spinal fluid to make sure that you in fact have these amyloid plaque in your brain, because that's what these drugs do. They take away the beta amyloid. So it's important that that they make sure that you have the plaque, and then they can do additional PET scans. It used to be that CMS only approved one PET scan per lifetime. Luckily, that has changed. Now they can do more PET scans because that's necessary when dealing with these drugs. And I want to add one other thing, that these drugs are only approved for people with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's and people in the mild stage of dementia. So once person is further along in the dementia stage, these drugs wouldn't be appropriate. But we like to tell people, go to your neurologist, get a baseline if you're experiencing cognitive issues, and see if you potentially would be a candidate for these drugs. Because even though they're not a cure, it's actually wonderful to be able to tell families that there's actually something that, although not perfect, can give a family more time to have better quality of life with the person that they love. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Rachel.
Thank you, David. And as we said earlier, I'm sure that might have prompted some questions in your minds. Please be sure to put your questions in the chat and we'll address those at the end of the session. So we're going to move on now to what's been happening in the field of Alzheimer's research. We'll listen again to some of the experts and then some of the caregivers.
This is an incredibly exciting time in Alzheimer's and dementia research. The advancements that we've made in the last decade to understand the disease as a continuum, meaning that the biological changes are starting a decade or more before someone is experiencing the changes in the memory and thinking. This sets the stage for possible prevention. The idea that when we have the tools to identify those individuals at the earliest time point, and when we have the interventions to target individuals at that earliest time point, we can intervene to stop or slow the progression of the disease before an individual loses their memories.
And then Dr. Carrillo about exploring lifestyle factors.
Growing evidence indicates that people can reduce their risk of cognitive decline by adopting key lifestyle habits. More and more research shows that factors like exercise, nutrition, and aggressive management of cardiovascular risk factors may impact our ability to slow cognitive decline as we age. And through current studies, we're exploring how certain lifestyle factors may even reduce the risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia.
And I talked briefly about those lifestyle factors earlier, and we'll tell you at the end of the presentation where you can find on the website a list of these programs that talk about healthy living for the brain and body and can be helpful in identifying ways that you can minimize the risk.
A lot of hope does come from the Alzheimer's Association, all the research that is being done. Even though there is not a cure today for the disease, I know in my heart there is going to be a cure one day. And I know we're getting closer for that cure. Because even if you fail in a research study, you learn from that failure in the research study. That failure always brings progression.
And then from Les.
It's nice to see the association spearheading in many ways the emphasis on getting the money at the federal level and at the private sector to get the research done so that someday there will be an effective treatment, hopefully cure, hopefully prevention.
We're going to move on now to talk
Nice
about.
to see the
Hold on
association
1 second.
spearheading.
Let's go here, and then let's go here. Clinical studies are key to advancing Alzheimer's research, and we wanted to share a little bit about clinical studies and the program called Trial Match that is available to everyone. So let's start with Dr. Fargo.
Participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
You might hear the phrase negative trial, which means it didn't hit the endpoint. It didn't result in an FDA-approved treatment for the disease. But I think the only negative trial is one that doesn't provide us with valuable information. If the trial is well designed and is a good scientific experiment, we can get extremely valuable data that can help plan the next trial and make it even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even prevention. By participating in clinical research, you can move us toward methods of treatment and prevention for all those affected by this devastating disease. Alzheimer's Association Trial Match is a free clinical studies matching service for those with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers. To start, simply create a confidential user profile and receive a list of studies that may be a match for you. Don't just hope for a cure, help us find one.
So Trial Match is available to people who are healthy and don't show any sign of Alzheimer's, and to everyone that also has Alzheimer's. So it is available. You go to the website, as Dr. Carrillo said, and you can get more information about it. So for a recap, scientists have increased their understanding of Alzheimer's significantly over the past decade. People living with dementia, caregivers, and healthy volunteers without dementia are all needed for the clinical studies in order to look for methods of prevention, treatment, and ultimately a cure. Both drug and non-drug studies are taking place across the country and online. And Trial Match, as I said, is a free clinical studies matching service that will help match you up with the studies that are available. So the Alzheimer's Association has many resources available. As I mentioned, my dad and I were able to take care of one of the wonderful support programs that are available, a care consultation. We did that via Zoom, and we learned a lot about what we could do differently for my mom to make her more comfortable and to help her enjoy the days that she had left to share with us. So the mission of the Alzheimer's Association is to lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. The vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. Okay, let's do this again. Here we go. Okay, so the association is available on the phone, online, and in communities nationwide. And I just want to play these for you because I think it's so helpful to understand the reactions that people have had when they have used some of these support vehicles.
I've had a couple of phone calls that I've been able to make in to the call center. When I've had a couple of quick questions that I wanted to ask, you know, there's been a couple of nights, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have questions, you have anxieties, and I was struggling dealing with them, and it's amazing. It was one of the best things I ever did was keeping the call center on my favorites now. Just to know that there's somebody you can call who is aware of what you're going through.
And when you call that helpline, mention that you're from the Hudson Valley Division, and they will help get resources, let you know what the resources are in this area. And as Tim said, you know, get you to the next step or get you through the night or answer that question or just hold your hand if that's what you need at that point. Teresa found a lot of help online when she was first
When I
diagnosed.
went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this? Where can I go for resources? Where can I go for help? What do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
And then Tom's experience.
I've been diagnosed with dementia. The one place that I know I can go to for assistance and help and support is to the Alzheimer's Association. There are people there that I know by name that I can contact if I'm having a difficult time, or if I'm struggling to find some resource, that they will provide that to me.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about ways to join the fight. Katrina mentioned earlier the walk. There's one of the ways that are available. Volunteering is one of the ways that's available. You can volunteer in many different ways, whether you can spare a few hours a week or make a more significant time commitment. You might want to consider volunteering with the Alzheimer's Association. For me, being a community educator works out perfectly because I can pretty much schedule the times that I'm able to volunteer. There are numerous opportunities available. There are support groups that need facilitators. There are ways to help with the walk. There are advocacy opportunities available, ways to talk to our politicians and make sure that the needs of people with Alzheimer's is being heard at every level in our government, and that's advocacy. Thank you, Congress, for my mom, for my grandma. Becoming an Alzheimer's Association advocate, you can speak out on behalf of the needs and rights of people that are facing Alzheimer's disease. alzimpact.org. You can also get to it from the Alzheimer's Organization site. You can volunteer for Trial Match, as we talked about earlier. Everyone can help advance Alzheimer's research by participating in clinical trials. You can get started with the Trial Match with the free, easy app, Clinical Studies Matching Service, which is available on the site. The Walk to End Alzheimer's is once a year. It's held annually in more than 600 communities. We just had one recently here in the Hudson Valley. And it is the largest fundraiser to fight the disease, and it raises awareness and funds to benefit Alzheimer's care, support, and research. And the longest day, the day with the most amount of hours in the day, the summer solstice, is used to raise funds and awareness for care, support, and research efforts of the Alzheimer's Association through an activity of your choice. So all of these are ways that you can volunteer. This brings us to the end of our official presentation. You see the 800 number there for contacting. And I'm going to pass it to David now to answer any of the questions that came up in the chat. David.
Determine when a symptom is exactly that, as opposed to normal aging. For example, not remembering someone's name. Is it related to frequency or not remembering? Hope this makes sense. Thanks. And she also said, many thanks for taking on CMS. Greatly appreciated. Medicare should pay for a lot more of these drugs, as long as there are data to prove efficacy and improve quality of life. Well, thank you for saying that. And we're really glad that they changed their position, and they're at least providing this as an option now for people if once they meet with their doctor, if they are inclined to try these drugs, at least they had that option, because for so many years they didn't. So, and it's just the beginning. There are so many different drug therapies in the pipeline. So it's a it's a really exciting time. Many people don't realize that after the American and the Chinese government, the Alzheimer's Association is the third largest funder of Alzheimer's research in the world. We currently have $435 million in ongoing projects, over 1,100 projects in 56 countries on 6 continents. The only continent that we're not on is Antarctica. So we are really taking our mission very seriously, and we're making great strides. So there's a lot to be hopeful for. But to get to your question, how do you determine when these symptoms are what they are exactly as opposed to normal aging? So yeah, it is partially the degree to which somebody is experiencing these issues. So it's normal to forget someone's name. That happens to everybody. It's normal to occasionally forget a word or not be able to retrieve a word. It's normal to occasionally forget where your keys are. We, in fact, have a program called the 10 Warning Signs of Alzheimer's, where we spend the entire program going over normal age-related forgetfulness, contrasting that with when it potentially could be the beginning of dementia. So it really is kind of the degree to which a person is experiencing these issues. Mild cognitive impairment happens when somebody is experiencing cognitive decline or cognitive issues, but the major distinction between mild cognitive impairment and when someone moves to dementia is that with dementia, it significantly impacts your daily life. So that's the question you really have to ask. If a person is experiencing these issues, how prevalent is it? Like, is it significantly impacting your daily life? And if it is, we suggest going to the doctor, because a lot of people are reluctant to go to the doctor. They figure there's no cure for Alzheimer's. They don't want bad news. Maybe they're afraid to go to the doctor. But the truth is, there are a lot of different there's some forms of dementia, I should say, that are reversible. Alzheimer's is not. Alzheimer's is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. But there are a lot of other things that could be going on that mimic something like Alzheimer's. The person could have a vitamin B12 deficiency. They can have an overactive thyroid, an underactive thyroid. They could have Lyme disease. They could have sleep apnea. They could, if someone's having significant depression. There are so many different things. A lot of people are on medication. There could be a conflict between 2 medications that are causing forgetfulness. So there's so many different things, more than I mentioned, that could be causing someone to experience cognitive issues. So we say, go to the doctor, go to your primary care physician, and ask for a cognitive assessment, a cognitive battery. And then at least you have a baseline. So you could go back a year later and you could see, okay, I'm exactly where I was. I haven't progressed. Or maybe you go back a year later and you see that there has been progression. And then you know that perhaps you need to look into this more closely, go to a neurologist, etc. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. George says, I could not view your screen at all for some reason. It remained black alongside the gallery participants. Could you put the 800 number in the chat, please? Oh, yes, 800-272-3900. And I put my contact information in the chat. So I would be happy to, if you send me an email, and if you have any particular questions or if you'd like information on any particular area, I could send you more information on that. So are there any other questions? You can feel free to put it in the chat, or you can come off mute and ask the question.
I also want to say to George that there's a participant guide available, George. So since you weren't able to see the presentation, David can send that to you if you just shoot him an email and let him know that you'd like to have that, and that'll have the recap of the slides as well.
Yes, if you send me your email, I would be happy to send you the participants guide. Thank you, Susan. So any other questions? Okay, well, I thank everybody for being here. You know, a large part of our mission. My screen was black also. Okay, well, if you shoot me an email, um, my email is dazucker@alz.org. I'd be happy to send you the participants guide. And I really would like to thank everybody for coming today because the truth is, you know, who wants to talk about Alzheimer's? It's not the happiest of subjects. But what you have done by just being here is really empowered yourself to that, so that if you are faced with these challenges, you'll be able to make the best decisions possible. And I want to thank Rachel and Katrina and Kitty and everybody from TRA, Friends of TRA. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you both, Rachel and David, for a very informative afternoon. And I am sorry for those who are unable to access the screen. I've just resent David's email in the chat. And I do hope that everyone will reach out to him also for a copy of the participation guide.